Started. Call the meeting to order. Are there any public comments? Any public comments? Any public comments? Hearing none, we'll move forward. Approval of minutes, February 17th. Any discussion?
Move approval.
Second.
Moved by Steve, second by Bob. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Approve current agenda. Any no modifications?
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and second, Bob and Lynn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Approve consent items. Anything on there, Sheila?
Okay. No, I just have for the bills payable, basically the charge back to the county for $3,900. We had a bill for Peterson, for our auditor. They had to prepare the 1099s for me at the end of December. And then the rest of the expenses are related to workshops and field days that we had. They were reimbursement for mileage. For this, we had a workshop on the 10th and on the 11th of March. One is to Olmsted SWCD for speaker expenses.
What was that?
That was, it was Soil Health 101. They had, her last name was Cates, and then Dean Sponheim from Iowa, who was a farmer, came and talked. So the expenses were for him primarily.
We must approve that at some point.
Yes, yes, we did.
Fine.
And it's part of the 319 nitrogen reduction grant. That's for the field day expenses. So total expenses, $4,500.
I'm curious, who needs the 1099s?
Anybody during the year that received money for any practices, like primarily the cover crops.
It's all those cover crop folders that we have, all those guys that got paid out of that.
Oh,
Yeah.
those come on
Right.
1099s.
Yeah, I don't get any, because I'm technically a Winona County employee, so that's all with them. So there's no payroll things, but any payments to landowners.
Yeah, just usually
Yeah.
1099s or independent contractors or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Previously, Wanda has been just doing them up for me because she does them just when she does hers for the SWCD, but she just had too much on her plate, so I asked the auditor, please.
Are they gonna keep doing them, or are they?
I'll leave that up to Wanda. If she wants to do them, that would be fine, otherwise, but then we're gonna be getting a new office manager for the SWCD, so I don't know how.
I wasn't at the meeting, so
Yeah,
I
okay.
was stuck down in Spring Valley.
Okay,
I was tempted to make it, but I couldn't get back in time.
okay.
So,
Yeah, so anyway, I'll figure that out at the end of this year, how that happens.
any other discussion on consent items?
Move to approve the consent business.
Second. Motion made second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Board reports. Who wants to start? James, you want to start?
Yeah, Homestead, basically, it's just some new contracts, most of them apparently grass and waterways, terracing, whatnot. Paid a well sealing. Not a heck of a lot else. Went to the St. Charles water side program that was actually pretty interesting. Well, I shouldn't say actually pretty, it was very interesting. And had a lot of comments about that. Comments originating out of that. But, I don't know if there's a report that comes out on that.
Yes,
or
I am
is-
working on that, so I'm right now taking all the comments from all the 5 waterside chats and putting them into a big spreadsheet. So they will be on that WinLAC planning website, so people can, basically I want people that were there to look to see that their comments were appropriately captured. There were a couple instances where I had sticky notes, and so I had to get help from others to try and decipher exactly what it said. But I think I got everybody's mostly. Yeah, so that will be putting together, and we will have a report on that.
Anything else, James? You're up, Bob.
Pretty quiet. Waukesha County, I did attend the waterside chat, got good information.
Steve?
I have nothing, I don't have anything to report.
A lot of pages of stuff, but nothing much more than usual business. I went to the waterside chat thing too. It was an interesting conversation, I thought, with the groups.
Yeah, I did not make our last SWCD meeting. Like I said, I was supposed to get on a delivery, and the guy didn't show up, and we were at an elevator down in Spring Valley, and so I got behind, and then it was the windy day, so I wasn't able to get back in time. So I texted London, but I know I wasn't going to be able to get there. So I don't really know what happened at the last meeting. I haven't had a chance to follow up anything. Maybe you can help. Nothing too over the top.
They decided to make the offer to Wanda.
Which I figured was coming.
Yeah. Yeah, there wasn't too much else on the agenda.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a fairly short meeting, actually.
Well, the only thing I have is just kind of what I've been pounding on all winter, I guess, is with the fertilizer prices and the grain markets and stuff. Continues to be a very interesting year, watching how farmers are adapting to alternative practices and nitrogen management and fertilizer management, and the doors that have been slung wide open. I was on the largest farmer in Iowa a couple weeks ago, and him and I have had several meetings, 40-some thousand acres, personal invite to come down and talk with him, and most of the time you get about an hour, and he gave me 5, which was pretty crazy. It is just an adaptation that I've never seen before. I realize I'm not that old, but in 20 years of doing this, it's been an absolute crazy thing. So it's really neat to see how I think this is going to change and adapt farming practices and different ways of managing nutrients that I think is going to be very beneficial moving forward. Both not only just for the land, but profitability for landowners and farmers, but also how we can influence what it is that the reason why we get on those boards. So it's been challenging, but very fun at the same time to watch people ask questions I've never heard people ask before. So it's been fun. So that's really all I had. Anybody got anything else? Hearing none, we'll move on to 7, board discussion and action items. A financial update. Sheila.
Okay, excuse me, for the budgets or the reconciliations that came out at the end of February for both the money market and the checking, we were at $87,579, and then at the end of March it was $87,582. So that depended on what checks were cashed, and then I did get a payment on one of the grants. So nothing too out of the ordinary with any of that.
Discussion on that. All right, 319 small watershed.
No, we got a budget to approve. I did get a budget request for 2023 from Winona County that I need to submit by April 29th. So I did put together, I have not received the request yet from Olmsted or Wabasha, but anyway, the budget that I have put together is on page 16 in the packet. And not increasing the allocation from the counties at all, and that has not changed since 2010. And just going with what we have, with the grants that we have, I might say that the payroll part, I decreased a bit, actually, because with Winona County, my Winona County time is actually increasing, so I offset that by, so this is 5% less than what we have this year.
You're talking about the 7906?
I am talking about under expenses, payroll, 22,500.
Oh, yeah, sorry, yes, gotcha.
Yeah. And this is putting in the 2 grants that we currently have. Not, so there's potential for that grant revenue to be higher if I be able to get a grant this fall for implementation for next year.
Any discussion on this?
Looked okay to me when I read it over. But I don't know everything.
No, as long
So
as
this
they
is
don't
what's
have more
going-
expenses than revenue.
This is what's going to the county here?
Yes, yep.
Okay.
I will also submit, there's a form that they have me fill out, which I did not include in the packet. It was just kind of a fillable PDF, and then I usually submit a cover letter.
Is that normal? Just leading into a point I want to bring up after a bit. Is it normal for us to submit to you by April?
Winona County is the earliest of the 3 counties.
But
Yes.
April is normal?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of when I did it last year. I think I got the letter from Pat Mulga last year after our April meeting. So I had to put it together and submitted it saying this is tentative, or we were meeting in June, but I didn't, but figured as long as I got the letter at the beginning of this month, go ahead and do it, submit it, and then I'm ready when I get the request from Waukesha and Homestead.
I think Waukesha's June and July.
Okay,
They want theirs.
okay, that sounds good.
Okay. Any other discussion? Hearing none, we need a motion on that, don't we?
Yep.
Is there a motion?
Move to approve budget.
Second?
Motion made by Bob, second by Lynn. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, motion carries. All right, LAT, Local Advisory Team, MDA grants.
No, 319 focus program,
Ms. Reed,
B.
you went right to C.
Oh, yes, sorry, yep, B, I missed B. I already had it checked off, my fault. B.
Okay. All right, so we have, and this is just an update, this is something the board already approved last year, April. And I included the letter that I submitted last year on April 15th to Greg Johnson, who's the lead at MPCA for the 319 Small Watersheds Focus Program. And just to give you a little bit of a background, the state is transitioning away from the competitive 319 grants. And so what they're doing instead, and it's not the state that's doing this, is happening at the federal level. The EPA funding is the federal money that supports the 319. So they're getting away from the competitive grants, and what they're doing is just looking at, instead of using funds to address the competitive grants, they're focused on trying to identify small watersheds that are small enough to do a lot of work in a small area and to see results, i.e. Getting streams off the impaired waters list or effectively protecting. And when they do this, they focus on everything that's impacting that small watershed. For example, my 319 grant right now is just focused on nitrogen reduction. The small watershed focus program would, if that was the grant that we have right now, it would not only work on nitrogen reduction, it would work on sediment reduction, it would work on anything that's a issue for that watershed, looking at it holistically. So they started this, when they started this small watershed program, they picked 10 small watersheds in the entire state of Minnesota and working on to develop a very detailed, and Bob knows probably more about this because of Wabasha already has one of these. And so they developed this detailed plan, and then they start to implement it. And so 10 are selected each year. 3 years have passed, or 3 selection rounds have passed. So there are 30 watersheds in the state that already have this, and now they're planning on selecting 10 more. And then once the ones that are selected this year are done or selected, they're not going to do any more until they're done with these 30 plus 10, 40 small watersheds. And so they're proposing having up to 16 years, if needed, to address these issues in these small watersheds. If things get improved before that 16-year period, then it's done, and then they'll find another watershed. So that's kind of how they're setting it up this year. So no application process, just a letter of interest, which I submitted last year. I anticipated that they were going to call and say, okay, let's have a phone call interview and talk about it, but things were delayed, I think in part because of COVID, and I think in part because of COVID impacting the previously selected watersheds, trying to get things off the ground.
So it's a little more of a make it or break it type of a deal. Like, you're either in or you're out, because the way if they're going to consolidate and move all the funds versus a little more competitive and broad scope, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So is it going to be make it or break it more of a scenario?
Right, if we, the 10 watersheds that are, small watersheds that are selected this time, those are the ones that are in, probably, if that's what you're referring to.
That's what I'm referring to,
And then
yeah.
anybody else who applied is out.
Make it or
Right.
break it.
Right,
Yeah.
and so it's just how the federal funds have been going. And
So if you're in for a long time.
right.
There's no having to reapply,
Correct.
reapply. I mean, you're just in
It's a
up to
committed,
16 years, and if you can keep proving there's a problem, you're going to keep getting it.
it's a committed block grant, I guess, you might want to,
Long-term block grant.
yeah,
Yeah.
So the one in Wabash County, is that the West Union?
yes,
Okay.
yep. And then in Olmsted County, there's the Cascade Creek area.
Okay.
And then in Mower County, it's Dobbins Creek. And I can't think of any others that are in southeast Minnesota. And also when they select these, they also look at geography in the state. They're not going to pick all 10 of them in southeast Minnesota, for example. They're
They
trying
should.
to, they should, I know, they should, but they're going to be diplomatic in trying to,
So who's making the decisions on which?
the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, specifically Greg Johnson, who the letter was addressed to last year.
So what's really our part in this then? I mean,
Well, our part is, we had, last year when I resubmitted the letter, it was reviewed by the board, and we said, okay, we'll send it in, see what happens. And so I'm just giving you an update. So I've been contacted by Cindy Osborne, who works with Greg Johnson okay, it's time, we're gonna make a selection, so we need to set up an interview. So right now that is set for Monday, May 9th. And I know that Shell Rock has submitted a letters, and they're also having an interview that week. I just happened to hear that. But anyway, so right now, it looks like Skip Langer and Terry Peters are gonna be in on the call, and there are some others that I need to connect with. It looks better if we can show partnerships. I know Jeff Weiss, I would like to be a part of that call based on the work that he's been doing with the North Fork Whitewater, and that's, and the letter that I submitted was for the North Fork Whitewater, so it's on the map, just so you can, I put it, see here, it's not Dry Creek, but that upper North Fork Whitewater. So it includes Wabasha and Olmsted County. And Olmsted SWCD has been doing a lot of work with farmers in there, working on stream connectivity restoration, and that hasn't started yet, because I know Skip said there was some easement problem or issues that needed to be worked through with the landowners. But anyway, that's the sub-watershed that was submitted for this letter, and that's the one that they will
So
consider.
just the upper North Fork, you said?
Yep, the upper North Fork.
I guess I'm just trying to figure out the relevance of the elected process in this. This is MPCA, you said, right? Big government coming to government employees, and our role in it is really nothing, right? So the government is doing what government's going to do without elected input, is what I see happening. Which,
So what our position, is our position just to facilitate it?
Well, we submitted the letter of interest, and that was all that was required to be a part of this or be considered in this. And now I will be a part of this interview process with others. And if they select us, what would happen is I would need to provide information on, or data sets, which, you know, technically that's what I would have to do, but the PCA already owns the data sets, or, you know, they've worked on the Watershed Restoration and Protection Strategies Report, which I referenced in the letter. So they already have that. When they did that, there was the Soil and Water Assessment Tool, SWAT. There's that data. Other data that would be available would be some of the modeling that's being done for the watershed. So it's just providing the information. The one thing that would take time is it's basically putting together a small watershed plan that's very focused and very detailed. And
Well, here's a question, and open for discussion, of course, too. I think if you don't apply, then your area can't be selected, right?
correct.
So I guess to answer your question, what we get out of it, well, they really spend 16 years on a certain area, maybe that's long enough to get enough people involved to really see some sort of difference as far as sediment and things like that, which could be worthwhile. But we always talk about getting data, but what's it all for? What's it all for? Well, sometimes it's inconclusive, I think, if you just get a few people, but still, there's other farms or cities or whatever that contribute to problems that's seen as problems, you know. Yeah. So I guess the long time focus seems like a good thing to me. That's just something I think.
well, yeah, I'm just wondering what's our relevance? Why are we sitting here? Why is the community paying our mileage and our per diems to come down? We're just basically becoming more and more figureheads of the government's doing what they're gonna do, and they're gonna come here and tell us what they're doing.
Rather than just saying, here's your
Yeah.
money, you figure out how to allocate
Yeah.
it. So that's my
I'm not
question.
voting on this, I'm just here to
Yeah.
Mhm.
I
And this
guess
is an
tell-
update because
tell
we
my
voted
community
on
what
the
my
letter
government's
last
doing.
year.
No, I
Yeah.
get it. So I guess to me, to Steve's point and to Lynn's point, our say is the application and the location that we've deemed, right? So that's what we're saying.
Right.
But ultimately, it's up to one individual as to who gets it, it kind of sounds like. Maybe he's got a little panel, and I'm just
I'm sure he
hypothetical.
has a selection panel, because I'm
To
trying
some
to
extent,
remember.
or
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Right, right.
And then, do we get to say what happens in that area? Are we the ones that go and say, landowner A, landowner R, landowner Z, are you willing? We have federal funds.
Well,
Are
look at
we
the-
putting that together and saying, these are some things, some options for you
Well,
to
it's
help us with that?
It's a partnership.
Or is it somebody else doing it?
No,
With the West
it's,
Indian thing, from what I understand, our district manager and other people work to actually come up with a plan, and then we've got people that are going around to see landowners and see if they'd be interested, and
Mhm.
the
Yep.
money's available,
right.
as you said, Josh.
It's a
So,
collaborative partnership.
locally, really, it's kind of decided, I guess, what's happening as far as I know.
Well, so my question is, are we as the Whitewater Joint Power Board elected officials, or is it the SWCDs coming in with this money and they're doing it? Or who's actually the person scratching down, going to landowner F and saying, hey, we've got some monies available, we've noticed a problem, this is how we can help you help us in the community? Is it us doing it? Is it a different organization? Who's actually doing the boots on the ground work?
Well, the boots on the ground would be myself and SWCD partners, and it would be local we're looking at the city of Elgin,
Yep.
having a piece, DNR participating. And as far as, if selected, I'm assuming that, like right now, the Whitewater has the 319 nitrogen reduction grant. Okay, I'm assuming that is what it would be, once everything is put together, the grants would come here for approval, but it definitely would be a partnership.
So and Sheila, I'm just trying to figure it out. It kind of alludes to Steve's point,
Sure.
is, are we acting as the administrator or the fiscal agent of that money? And then we would be paying,
Right.
in essence, Olmsted County SWCD for their
Yep.
time to do it. So
Yep.
really we're acting as a fiscal agent administrator for that money allocated for an
Mhm.
indefinite amount of time.
Right.
And we would divvy that out as see fit.
Mhm.
You would oversee it. As a board, we would approve it.
Mhm.
They would say, hey, this is what needs to be done, come to you, say, yep, I'll put it in front of our board. We say, yep, we think it's a good idea, stamp that back through. If we don't think it's a good idea, then you go back and say, hey, they don't like it.
Mhm.
So we are still governing that money,
Right.
making sure that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Is that a fair analysis?
That's how I would view it, even though it's being structured a little bit differently, but.
How we
that-
get it is being structured
Right,
differently, but
right.
we're still administrating,
Yes.
yes. Okay.
Yes, it's federal money, yeah.
So really, the application process is a make it or break it versus a more broad scope. But nobody from MPCA is going to be nitpicking, saying, well, why are you
No.
doing cover crop on landowner F?
No, there will be lots of input locally to identify what the landowners would like to do, and,
So we ultimately have the control of the money, not MPCA.
right. And another piece of it is, like all 319 grants, we do have to come up with 40% non-federal match, which we can use state monies for.
So we
So-
would have to lobby to the state to get that?
Well, we can get grants from the state that would be used as match. A lot of the, when I was looking at historically what's been done, one of the things that I noticed is that the entities that got these in the previous rounds were entities that also had one watershed, one plan projects. So that would be some state money. An easy say, okay, state money matches with this.
Well, I think.
But this isn't up and running yet, so.
No, but this isn't either. So-
I believe on the West Indian, even private grants,
Yes,
Limited.
yes,
Give a lot of
Yeah,
money for
that's
some
true,
of
too.
Would that qualify for the 40%?
yes, yes. Mhm.
I like that idea.
Yeah, I do too.
That's, would be one big benefit to that is if you've heard me preach this at Winona County, getting private funds rather than always going back to the taxpayer
Mhm.
and go that route. So does cost share go into the 40%? So like the cost share, like what the farmer would pay?
Yep, yep,
Or, excuse me, landowner? would pay?
yes,
I
yes
guess
it does.
take that out of my verbiage.
Yeah.
I'm trying very hard to take that out of my verbiage.
Yeah, so anyway, I just wanted to give you an update that, you know, nothing when we submitted the letter and it was approved last year, I kept getting emails, oh, we're running behind, be patient, and now this is,
So I have one more question.
Sure.
If they're focusing, and you probably, not saying this facetiously, but you probably don't know the answer, but maybe you do. In other words, I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
okay.
But if we focus this money in a small area for an indefinite amount of time, up to 16 years, in essence, what are we doing in the other we used to be more broad scope. So now all of a sudden, are we just letting everything else go? And it's going, well, sorry, we'll get to you in a decade and a half. Are they just going to keep going to the federal government and saying, well, taxpayer, give us more because this is the way we set this up, but we got this other land going to waste and we're focusing it all here.
I know.
What's the
Yeah.
carry out
I
to
would
that?
think there would still be opportunities for individuals outside of these specific areas that still come to the.
Well, I'm just wondering,
Whitewater or whatever.
is this where all of a sudden,
Right.
the step down little brother state government comes in and says, well, oh my gosh, we're losing sight of all these other things because the federal government's focused here, we need more money, and
I know.
and rather than trying to blanket a little bit, now all of a sudden,
Yep.
and it's an excuse to go back
Yeah.
and stick their hand out and say, well, we need this money.
Yeah, well,
You know.
for the first round, the first letter that I submitted was for the entire, I think it was for maybe, I think I picked like north, middle, south, not the headwaters or the main stem. And I was told that was too broad because it's hard to measure a difference when you're doing things here and here and here and not focused on here. So to answer your question, this is one opportunity for funding. There are other opportunities for funding that are not a part of the 319 program. And so I guess for those other areas of the watershed, maybe focusing on what those other opportunities are. But yeah,
You see my concern?
yes, I do. I agree wholeheartedly.
The other concern I would have with this, and I'm not saying that we don't go with it, but the other concern I have is the same thing I'm seeing in these tourismus, where they're basically coming in and saying, well, sorry, you got labeled. You need to farm a certain way. You need to treat your land a certain way. You don't have a choice. It's the law. And this is one now the federal government's coming in saying, well, we gave you money, sorry. It starts with what looks like good intentions, but all of a sudden becomes regulatory mandatory to be a certain way because you're encompassed into something that a board put together someplace. That's my fear, is that this is step one in becoming land management, regulatory land management in an area because it's a targeted, focused area. And, the argument could be, well, technically the red area is a target. And the state can say, well, the whole state, and then the government can say, well, it's the, it all depends on what it is, but I think they got to start small and go big. So the red flag goes up for me whenever something like this happens, because to me it's government coming in saying, well, we're going to fix this, we threw money at it, and this is the way you're going to be. And when they put it back to one person's power, that's a scary thing.
Yeah.
Well, just for conversation, I've had some personal experiences even, which is driving me, which isn't indicative of everyone's way of looking at things, but I kind of like the whole area approach only because I've seen like nice waterways put in, and then if somebody upstream ends up with a 3-foot gully and fills your whole waterway, and then it needs to be dug out or whatever. I mean, what have you really done? You've wasted money, even as a fiscally conservative person. I think about that. It's foolish to have some other area going against what you're trying to accomplish. So, I mean, that's one thing I like about the long-term,
Localized, you're saying, not
Yeah.
the whole area, but locally.
locally, but long-term, just to see if we can really make a difference once, instead of just dotting here and there.
I can see the benefit to it, yeah, there's no doubt, I'm not arguing that, it's just all the little underlying things that start to
Yeah.
come into play sneak in your head, so.
Well, one thing I like about the Upper North Fork is doing a project in the top of a watershed. And I know that came up in some of the waterside chats, you know, about the importance of focusing in the upland areas because, and not, you know, yes, it's important to work on the downside of the watershed, but that's where the problems is, that's where the issues start to be evident, is in the upper ends. So, and that's one thing that would be achieved by doing the Upper North Fork.
It really parallels, this is a micro approach to the one watershed, one plan, which is a broader approach, and it all is focused and targeted on certain areas. And when I took office 10 years ago, it was much more where are the willing participants, and how can we help those willing participants engage in this. So now if you're not in the focused and targeted areas, it makes it more difficult. And if you're in those areas, you're gonna, you know, have far more resources. But the approach to me it just seems like it's moving more and more towards the big government managing things. I haven't voted on any of this, and I know Sheila's just doing her job. She's made this application for this particular watershed. It's MPCA and our local staff. I haven't participated in this at all at this point, right?
Well,
And I'm, you know, so from the elected standpoint, government's just doing what it's doing. It takes the money from the taxpayer, and the local involvement and local elected involvement keeps moving away from the SWCDs, which that's, you know, the one place that I've been very supportive of right from day one when I took office, to what I consider to be really another level of government. And this is, you know, here's another way that it's just kind of somewhat circumventing our elected input.
Yeah, and that happened at the 80,000 foot level where they just decided
Mhm.
to, you know, this is what Steve's trying to say, if I read this back right, is the decision to localize came without input from the locals.
Mhm.
correct. That is true.
Mhm.
That was
They
the federal-
said, this is the way we're gonna do it. Now locals, you decide how you wanna do it.
Mhm.
Rather than saying, hey, locals, do you want to do it this way, or do you see a broad scope approach? That's really what happened. So big government said, we're gonna tell you how to do it, it's our money. We don't really need any input. Now you figure out how to do it the way we wanna do it.
That's kind of how the way things are done in all of government, though. Even if you hold an elected office, you might have 50 groups or 100 groups that come to you with things that could use attention or whatever, could use government money or help. And it's kind of the same thing here, where they're going down to this water level or whatever to get the applications, the input, the whatever about what would be good to pay attention to. So, I mean, it's kind of normal scope of things, I believe, where,
Well, there's been a general, I mean, this is more political than water related, but there was a time where the county surveyor was elected. There was many more positions that were elected. And I come from a position of grassroots level government up, and this comes more from a position of upper level government down. So I just continue to support the local level being actively involved, and that's just the fight that I fight for. So
I think that's a great thing. Sometimes it's hard to even find people.
yeah, but I won't let it go.
Yeah, no, it's,
Yeah.
we're struggling for it.
So I just see the progression happening, and it is what it is.
So, I guess where are we at then, Sheila? I mean, this is,
Yeah,
there's really not a motion to be made for
No.
anything. It's
No.
just more informative.
more informative, excuse me, and then just let you know that was scheduled for May 9th, and so I'll give an update at the next meeting in June to see, you know, either say, yep, they're interested and they want to have an in-person look at the watershed before they make the final decision, or we didn't make the final cut. It'll be one of those two by June, I would think.
Any other discussion? All right, move on to C, local advisory team.
Okay, and just giving you an update, I know Don Bernau and Mike Cruz were here and gave an overview of that project work. And just to give you an update, you know, the Altura, that's kind of on hold until, because the Duisma that was originally delineated changed, you know, and expanded, so then there were more people to consider, you know, being a part of the local advisory team. So that's kind of on hold until that Duisma has been finalized. Utica, just FYI, going through the parcels that are in that area, there are 74 unique landowners. However, there's many of those landowners where it's, you know, the husband owns this parcel, the wife owns that part, you know, there's family clusters. So it's less than that amount. But 74, 4 of those were non-farmers, like Matthew Construction or something like that was in there. So actually 70 unique landowners.
Do you have that map for Utica?
No, I do not. I did not include it in the, I'm sorry, I should have included it in the packet.
Because we had it, we saw that map at one time.
Yes, we had it at the meeting and Don had it in the PowerPoint. I could bring it to the next meeting.
Yeah, it'd be good to email it to me, because I own a couple parcels of land in Utica, or one and my mother owns the other one. So.
Okay. All right. Now to Josh. Or to the whole board. And so anyway, 5 people said definitely yes, they will be on the local advisory team. 4 others expressed an interest, but they would, you know, so basically 9 said yes, in some way, shape, or form they will be involved in a local advisory team. Elgin has 28 unique landowners, and not having anybody, I haven't been able to contact all yet, but so that's coming together, and we're looking at having the first meeting for both of those groups, the Elgin and the Utica local advisory teams, probably after harvest, because we don't want to schedule them at a time that's inconvenient.
You're talking next December.
Possibly,
November,
yes.
December.
How many landowners?
28 unique landowners.
28 in Utica?
70 in
I
Utica.
was gonna say, I
Yeah.
figured it'd be a lot more. than
Yeah,
28.
yeah, and, yeah.
Good.
So just updating you on progress, what's going on there, and how the timeline is coming out.
Any other discussion? On to D, 319 nitrogen reduction grant.
Okay, everything for that grant is done except for the farm economic sessions, and working on pulling those together, having guest speakers, and kind of the way it's being proposed is having a virtual meetings, because I think that might be more convenient for people, but we will see how that kind of plays out. But otherwise, working on the final report for that grant with the other pieces.
Okay. Discussion on that. Agency reports. Okay. I do have one comment, I guess, here before we finish. Is there, Steve kind of made a comment here this morning too, and it's something that I've been thinking about. And I'm not saying this is necessary, but I know at one point we met monthly. Now we're at bi-monthly. Is it necessary to keep doing this if what happens, any discussion on maybe going quarterly? And this is just open to discussion, because some of these meetings we accomplish a lot, some of them we don't do a whole lot. And the way I looked at it with, if we need to, like we've done in the past, and Sheila's called me and said, hey, we've got this thing going on, I'll say, hey, just call the groups individually so we're not meeting as a group. Can't make any decisions, but we can have a consensus of some sort. Or there's always the Zoom aspect if we really need to do something. It's why I asked when the board, our county board for Winona, and then I laid out a quick quarterly schedule, and it was December, March, June, and September. That would meet that fiscal, because in December we could begin to lay it out. March we could approve it, move forward. I was just trying to put things into perspective and say, is this necessary? We continue to meet. Completely open. I'm not pushing for anything, but just a question to the other board members. It doesn't have to be decided today, obviously. I'm just throwing this out here.
Well, yeah, it would need to be on our agenda
Yeah.
for the next meeting.
Yep, but something to think about.
I'd certainly be fine with.
So I can put it on the agenda as a discussion, or how do
Yeah,
Hey,
I'm just bringing it up as
Yeah.
a subject of topic.
Yeah, when I started 10 years ago, this was a very active group, and today it feels more like, I don't know if we voted on one thing, other than maybe the budget. We're kind of here receiving what our government is doing. This is, it used to be, it was that active elected members, determining how we were going to best utilize the taxpayers' dollars that we're taking. And, I don't see the need, and in fact, with the one watershed, one plan continuing to develop, I question the need for the entire board. This all takes taxpayers' dollars. Hey, I charge for my mileage to come here. I don't get any, per diem or anything, but those are taxpayers' resources, and if we're here simply to receive and not participate.
Well, what we've been talking about even on the WinLAC, whether we're gonna have a entity or a collaboration or whatever, it's kind of the same issue. And it's, everything adds up. If you think of the hundreds of groups like this all over the country or whatever, I mean, certainly, it's quite a bit of money probably.
Yeah.
Is it a fair thing to say, Steve, and I don't know because how long have I been on this board, 6 years? Is it a fair thing to say that years ago, maybe Sheila, you've been involved with this 106 years, right?
same amount of time as Steve?
Steve, 10 years.
Yeah.
So I don't have the answer to this question, but just thinking, at one point, the activeness of some of these boards was maybe positioned more from county funds rather than federal and state funds, or more state funds and county funds, where there was a lot more active side of reporting. Because if we went to a county board member,
It wasn't more county funds.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that the local involvement also had local representation back to the county boards. A
Right.
lot more close. Now, I mean, you bring up Whitewater Joint Power Board on the county board meeting, you know what I'm saying? There's less involvement because our funding sources have also changed. We're
Yeah.
getting a lot more, I don't know, maybe we are, maybe we're not, I don't know.
Well, we're not getting more money from the counties.
That's what I'm
But,
saying.
Yeah, looking, when I had to do the move, of course, I had opportunity to go through minutes from the past. And so I've been, with the budget and everything, no, I'm not doing an increase in the county allocation. But looking at the past,
What is each county's allocation right now?
It's
Is it 54?
7,900, 8,400,
Yeah.
4,900 or something like that.
yep.
Wabasha being
Homestead,
the least, we're closer.
8,112, Winona, 7,900, Wabasha, 4,900.
But I'll just put this in perspective. That 7,900 that Winona County's paid us since 2010, that 7,900 back then versus what it is today is basically twice the value. And at one point, it was probably twice the value of that. It was a bigger part of how the counties were funding us. And I'm not saying that needs to change. What I'm saying is I think there might have been a lot more accountability back to the individual smaller boards because that number was significantly higher in their budget,
Right.
meaning that we had more. But as that's changed, because the counties get starved from the state and federal government and saying, hey, we don't have it, the state and federal government saying, we're gonna keep more of it and tell you what to do with it, rather than giving it to them to tell us what to do with it. This is that separation Steve is talking about, because rather than giving it to the county and saying, you guys individually figure out what's right for you,
Right.
they're dictating it down to a 50-mile radius and telling us what to do with it,
Yep.
rather than just giving it to us and saying, hey, you guys
Yep.
figure out what to do. So I think it's how it alludes back to exactly what Steve is saying, is it's this top, bigger government telling us now down to a little localized area what we're gonna do, rather than channeling it through the system and saying, you guys figure out what it is.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? It alludes
Yeah.
to how Big Brother, in my mind, is controlling from way up here rather than down here.
Mike, I'm gonna go back to the amount that each county pays. Was that a 35-65 breakdown, or is that 100% administration? The money that's paid from each county. I saw 35-65 in here.
Oh,
On the budget?
on the bills payable. Oh, that was,
So the money
My
that
time.
the individual counties pay to support this group,
right.
is that 100% for administration?
That is for, yes, that would go towards administration.
Okay.
Yes.
So, and you say, 7,900, well, to me, I've been here 10 years, that's 79,000 at times, 4 different counties. And the idea of trying to streamline government wherever you can, the Southeast Minnesota Water Resource Board, which I sat on for 7 years until they finally dissolved a few years ago, with the advent of one watershed, one plan. I mean, if we're gonna take on new levels of government, and they're going to proliferate and expand and do what they're gonna do, does it make sense to continue to support taxpayers, to support all these administrative things? Don't go for what I'm saying and point to is none of that goes for dollars on the ground. It's just for us to exist.
Yep.
We're just taking it just to exist. So, the WinMAC isn't up and running yet until 2023. When do we expect that, Sheila?
We have June of 2023 to submit that to Bowser, and then they have a timeline to approve it, so then funding would be beginning or spring of 2024.
Yeah, I mean, with the amount of business that's on our agenda today, I don't feel good about the amount of money we're taking from the community, and just for administration, none of that going towards projects on the ground. All these other entities look at, and I carry a list with me. There are 32 different groups that are functioning, looking at water in Winona County. So I think, I just have struggles with why are we here, what are we doing, and just existing for the sake of existing is hard for me to.
Well, that's my point, is that the function of this board, I think, how it was financed and what it did 20 years ago, and I can't say this, you know, obviously.
It was cutting edge when it first started. It's where a lot of this stuff came from. And it kind of, I think, was such a success that that's probably partly where One Watershed, One Plan came from. Oh, look at this group started all these 30 years ago.
Yep.
Looking at the Whitewater, we should do that on a big scale.
That's what I mean, it's shifted,
Yeah.
and the focus and the finances have shifted.
But we're not living 30 years ago.
I'm having a struggle, only because it almost seems like there's two arguments, because if we disbanded this group, then we could have more tenions down from the top controlling things and no local control. But then again, it also makes good sense. Let me give you this little side story.
I get it, what you're saying, yeah.
I go to the RC&D meetings and there's only like 3 left in the state, Laurentian or whatever, and our manager, well, not even our manager, Peterson or whatever, one of our board members, and the other guy went Zoom, but went way up there to the meeting in February or whatever, the snowstorm, because they had the idea, let's just all band together. But there's some 80-some-year-old guy up there that somehow is even getting $500 or $800 a year for the state association. He got to be like head of the state association. They got like $80,000 in the bank up there, and they haven't done anything really for years. He doesn't want to let go of that. So there's an example of like a small group. Somebody still wants it, and it probably should be combined or whatever. So I think your good point is, though, as the relevancy changes over the years of certain groups, then it's probably very prudent to change the structure of things. However, it can be more efficiently done. So I guess that's...
Well, it's counterintuitive, because if you disband a local group, you're giving in to big government. But yet at the same time, you question whether you have any relevance as the local group. It's counterintuitive. That's the real issue. Because is that what they want? Do they want the local groups to go away because they're no longer relevant because of the Whitewater One Plan, which in essence is counterintuitive to trying to retain local control. So it's difficult. And that's why I brought up the quarterly thing that says, well, we can still act and function as a group, lower administrative cost, overhead cost. You know, maybe this group will get to meeting twice a year. I don't know. But I see it too, just in the 6 years, what was on the agenda, what we're doing. This is just, the reason why I asked all the questions I asked is it's just proving my point.
Yep.
What's our relevance? What do we get to do?
Yeah.
Can we do this once a quarter? Can we do it once a year? I mean, if this is the way and we can't stop this, the only thing we can do is control cost. But yet still try to retain some sort of relevance at local level. And that's the real issue. And the counterintuitive measure is sometimes you wonder if that isn't why things are put into place, where eventually people say,
Yeah.
I'm no longer relevant.
And it's too bad
Think about it
Matt isn't
for
here
next
today, because he might put things more into context, because he was on the board when, you know.
30 years ago.
He's not old,
But
come on.
don't. But so anyway, going through the minutes, you know, at one time, the Whitewater coordinator position was one full-time job for one person. Plus, the Whitewater had additional staff, 2 to 3 staff, depending on what projects were going on. So when that coordinator left for another position, it was about the same time period that the water planner for Winona County, which was Pat Bailey, left for another position. So there were 2 vacant full-time positions, and I know Matt Flynn was on the board at that time, and there were others. There was some, I don't know how things all, you know, it was kind of fuzzy to me who did what or whatever, but there was a decision to, well, let's be more efficient, because the Whitewater, you know, there was a lot of expenses and time with doing the payroll. Well, why don't we combine that with Winona County's and combine these 2 full-time positions into one position? And that was Natalie Siderius. She had that. She was the first one to have that combined position, 2 jobs rolled into one, and the payroll piece went to Winona County. So that was the the good thing that was the efficiency that was
Mhm.
being sought was having somebody who was a finance person doing the finance, which I appreciate now that I'm in this position, because that would really bog me down. But you still had a full-time position and a full-time position combined into one, so then you had, it wasn't full-time dedication to the Whitewater. There was, you know, so there was kind of this, so it changed things.
So is part of the issue, and again, it's a little bit philosophical, but is part of the issue we just don't have anybody active in the countryside out promoting these things like we used to have?
I think that's
But
part
also-
of it, yeah.
The funding aspect to do the things that we want to do, and
Yes.
how much time can you put with one person in a small area if that's really the only funding that we have? And then cover the administrative cost and everything else that goes
Right.
with it.
Right,
So that, on the administrative side, is a checkbox for one way, you know, one watershed, one
Yeah.
plan, because
Yeah.
they do, versus what we have, but yet it's a checkbox for us that says we have local representation. So it's we either have the funding to do it or we don't have the funding to do it.
right.
And unfortunately, a lot of that funding goes to administrative costs, so maybe in one box, you could say we cut our own throats, and in another box, we could say, well, we wouldn't have had the funding to do it anyway, or whatever
Right.
it is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to describe it.
And maybe,
I'll agree that this month's agenda was pretty minimal. I don't know if that's, I'd be interested to see historical numbers on, you know, like what's in the past, and how, whether it's gone up or drastically decreased or whatever, but really think, maybe this is anticipating next meeting or whatever, but the fewer times you meet, I think the more marginal your organization is going to be seen as. So that, I mean, you might be able to get by on a quarterly meeting or semi-annual or once a year maybe, or what. I mean, it sort of depends what you're thinking about. There's sort of a tipping point where any board or whatever like this is just gonna sort of, well, I mean, maybe that's the point, try to vote yourself out of existence. I don't know if that's
So
what's in the back of this discussion or not,
these were concerns that I had, you know, probably Sheila would attest to this. Nobody resisted 1-1 more than Steve Jacob. Is that true?
That's true.
Okay. I saw it as big government coming in.
I still call it big government.
Yeah, and I still feel that way. And I saw the writing on the wall of, it doesn't make sense to bring that in and then still have these small groups doing what they're doing, really competing with that group that has full control. The government, you know, if you allow it to proliferate, it'll create more, and it'll justify why this group is here, it'll justify why the Southeast Minnesota Resource Board needed to be there. But the reality is what it is. No matter how much I squawked about it, it came and it's here, and it's going to be part of how we implement water for water strategies for years to come. So to me, the next step is how do we streamline government next? And if we're spending a fair amount into administration and it never goes back to projects on the ground, what's the importance of this group? I mean, could this be done somewhere else? And I think once 1-1 is fully up and functional, it could, this little bit that we're doing here could be done by that group. So as important as this was 30 years ago, and even 10 years ago when I first took office here, you know, I was excited about the SWCDs and the elected representation there and the electeds being involved in this board. But that's kind of largely, in my view, being replaced by 1-1, and to justify just continuing to exist and continuing to pay The structure that it takes for the organization to exist is, that's the writing on the wall that I saw, immediately, and it's kind of come to fruition.
Well, to piggyback off that, I think the difference even 30 years ago, just in communication, technology, knowledge, they really relied on local people to know the landscape, to know the problems, to know these things. And so I guess the checkbox in the state or the county levels, but especially probably at the state level and the federal level, is that we have so much more information about topography and geography and everything than what we did 30 years ago. We don't necessarily need the local resources to tell us some of these things. We don't, the input needed has changed. The communication aspect has changed. It used to be you had to pick up a phone and call somebody or physically have that person there to communicate. Now it's completely different. Everything is so fast. So you just see it in business, you see it in farming, you see it in everything where it's gone this way. Just overall, we're intertwined without having to have all these separate groups. And again, I go back, and that's, maybe the quarterly thing is the beginning of a disbanding of some of these groups or this group, but I struggle to see the relevancy of meeting every other month right now.
Yeah, and along those lines, not only, how often do we need to meet, but could this, even without the 1-1 being up and running, could this be done by the SWCDs? I mean, do we need to be sitting here right
That's
now?
the
This
communication.
is not much work.
No, that's that communication with today.
And
where
that,
we're at.
the resources that are going here, maybe we could up our SWCD's budget slightly, rather than.
We need some way to collaborate, right? Like on the WinLAC, and you're like a secondary person, and we've got the same representation somewhat, plus a few other entities on the WinLAC, but we're just an advisory committee. But I mean, that could be almost like, if we could take a vote, but I don't know if it's got to be some more authority type structure than an advisory committee. But I mean, to make those kind of decisions like you're talking about possibly.
Well, I just look at when I go to the Winona County SWCD meeting and it's my turn for a board report, how much information have I taken from this group, reported it to Winona, and said, hey, here's this grand thing, you guys need to get involved. I mean, granted, Sheila, you do most of that anyway, but you're just because you happen to be in Winona County, I have that advantage, right? So, but I question Wabasha and Olmsted, how much information are you guys bringing back saying, hey, Whitewater's got this great thing going on, we need your help, support, whatever.
There's no other way it can be done.
And there's no other way it can be done, or it isn't already happening without us sitting here making that decision.
Already known for the most part.
It's already known, it's already done. And so, again, it is that counterintuitive aspect where I feel like small government's getting pushed out, but I also just question the relevancy of it, just with all the things that have changed since this board was formed, and the way communication used to be acceptable, the way people operated at those times, which were personal meetings, phones. We didn't have, and we didn't perceive things the way they are today. And we don't operate both in government and business the way we are today. So again, this isn't a ploy to disband this, but there are some real relevant things here where controlling costs and stuff like that, where again, I'm getting paid a per diem to be here today. And it's, to me, it's a question of, relevance.
Or even efficiency and not
Yeah.
being redundant with the same issues.
Yeah.
It's not that the work shouldn't be done.
No, but is there a better way to do it?
Yeah.
Are we really needed to get this work done? With the way and the scope of what I refer to as big brother, big government, seeing more and more and more of that, I don't know. I don't know if it's there. And I think we've got enough means of communication and technology if a very important decision needs to be made, and we could call a meeting, a special meeting, and go from there. And I really don't see the difference between 2 months and 3 months, to be honest. So, and you know, let's say this group exists for a few more years, or exists indefinitely, whatever it is, the 6 months, I have no idea. That's not what I'm making the play here. The outside agencies that come to us for funding, for example, that group, that meeting that came to us and we were behind, they're gonna have to learn to adapt it. They can't just come to us on a whim and say, hey, by the way, can you give us some money? They're gonna have to understand, you need to submit your request minimally 3 months before we meet, because otherwise you're not getting anything. They need to adapt to us rather than us to them, you know, so they're gonna have to be more proactive and not put us in a reactive state. I think it can be done very simply. You know, they just need to understand that we meet quarterly, you know. So something to think about, something I've been on my mind for a while with this group.
Yeah,
I think that should be on our next agenda.
I agree.
yeah. Well, interesting discussion this morning, I think, you know. I appreciate your perspective, Josh.
I wasn't gonna say anything, but it's been on my mind, and you made a little comment on the parking lot, just a good comment, you know? And I was like, you know what, I'm gonna say something to them. So,
We didn't advance notice, like you said, just prior.
well, just kind of smart to I said, you know, I'm gonna say something. So, all right, hear anything else from anybody?
We'll do adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Steve and Bob, all in favor, signify by saying aye.